pleasure to introduce another giant in addiction science, Dr. George Koob, Director of NIAAA and a longtime supporter of the college.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis toujours heureux d'être dans une ville française, mais ne vous inquiétez pas, je vais continuer en anglais. Okay. So my talk is really going to dovetail very, very well with that of Nora's, and I'm going to leave this slide up. I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite people on the planet who's winning the Eddie Award this year, Walter Ling. I see him walking in the back there. But I also want to apologize, Walter, because it's Father's Day, so I'm going to miss your talk. I'll watch your award, but I'm going to miss your talk because I want to go back to Washington and have dinner with my son. So there you go. On a sobering note, alcohol use disorders remain a huge problem in the United States. I know you have an opioid crisis, so we'll talk about that a little bit more and how alcohol contributes to that toward the end. But I would just want to emphasize to you that, you know, about 90,000 people a year die from alcohol use disorder or excessive alcohol use. We have, and one of the most sobering statistics is that half of liver disease in the United States now is caused by alcohol. Right? And the other point I'm going to make, and I'm going to show you some data on this, is that there's a dramatic increase in emergency department visits and hospitalizations related to alcohol in the last 10 years. I'm going to speak to what I call extreme binge drinking. And then as Nora emphasized very, very elegantly, I mean, we have the same exact problem. We have 3 medications on the market approved by the FDA for the treatment of alcohol use disorders, but less than 10% of people with an alcohol use disorder get any treatment whatsoever. So you just saw this slide, but I just wanted to emphasize too what a joy it is to work with NIDA and how we all collaborated on this really seminal contribution, I think, to the field. I think you'll find just about everything you ever wanted to know about addiction in this opus. I think it'll provide a framework for prevention, for treatment, for diagnosis, and there's, if I may say so myself, because Nora and I wrote it, a good chapter on the neurobiology of addiction. I'm going to go through a few things that we've accomplished in the past year since I spoke with you last, and this was a particularly important one for us, and that is we collaborated with HBO on a documentary on risky drinking. This is a no-holds-barred look at alcohol use disorder through the intimate stories of 4 people whose drinking dramatically affects their relationships. It aims to provoke a conversation about how to identify risky drinking and alternatives to the one-size-fits-all approach to treating it. We premiered this in December. We're going to actually show it at RSA this year, next week. We showed it at APA. We showed it at the Society for Prevention Research. You're most welcome to show it here one of these days. It's pretty, I have to tell you, it's a downer, all right? Because, I mean, it starts with 4 young women who are binge drinking, where HBO very cleverly charts every drink they're imbibing, and by the end of the evening, they're up to 10 to 15 drinks. And then it goes all the way to what I call a terminal alcoholic. This is an individual who's clearly dying of alcohol use disorder right in front of the camera. On a more positive note, we launched 2 challenges about a wearable alcohol biosensor. The plan was to get something where you could improve on, some of you have heard me talk about this before, improve on the Scram device. If you'll remember, that was a picture of Lindsay Lohan wearing it on People magazine, I believe, which is a big clunker, and it works really well, and it's used in, in the court system. But what I wanted is something a little more sexy that you look like an iPhone watch, and we're actually getting there. So Backtrack won the first challenge, and Milo came in second. Both of them are marketing a device that looks like an iPhone watch. It measures alcohol in the sweat and actually can follow in real time. And we launched a second challenge, and those results are coming in where we wanted another alternative measure, maybe an infrared measure. So we're really excited about this. You can, I'll let you use your imaginations about how you might use this with your teenager, but from a clinical research perspective, following, the standard measure has always been timeline follow back. Now, you guys can probably remember what you ate yesterday evening, but if you start working further back, it gets a little trickier. And so we may be able to actually chart exactly how much people are drinking in clinical trials or human laboratory studies. And then I want to tell you, for the rest of my talk, I want to tell you we have a strategic plan. It took a lot longer than I thought it would take, and I'm sure Nora can resonate with that. But anyway, our mission is a pretty simple one, and that's to provide the evidence-based information for diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of alcohol use disorders and enhance the public health impact of our research. So we're engaged in doing this. This is online, it's available, you can look at it if you're interested. And as Nora pointed out, we have some very, very good news, actually, and that is that prevention does work. Again, I'm reiterating many of the things that she pointed out to you, but binge drinking has declined among 8, 10, and 12th graders in the United States. That's the good news. And what do we attribute that to? Well, among other prevention measures, one that's particularly effective in the alcohol field is actually alcohol screening. It seems to be working in primary care, reduces alcohol misuse among adults. It's recommended by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. There's mounting evidence that screening is effective preventing and reducing youth alcohol misuse. NIAAA supports research to evaluate youth alcohol screening in primary care and other settings, and we have a number of grants out in this domain right now. And our two-question youth alcohol screener is effective for identifying alcohol use and alcohol use disorder among rural youth and youth with chronic health conditions. And the two questions are, how much do you drink and how much do your friends drink? It's that simple. But if you have a guy in a white coat who looks really officious, asking that question, it has impact. Here's the bad news. And I put this a little bit out of order. I want to emphasize this one, and that is that the young adult alcohol-related emergency department visits have been on the rise for the last 10 years. And this is the extreme binge drinking I'm talking about. Now, all of you know, because you remember your pharmacology, that if you drink, males here 5 drinks in 2 hours and females 4 drinks in 2 hours, you'll reach a blood alcohol level of 0.08. But in extreme binge drinking, we're seeing people reach twice that level. And this is what I was talking about, 10 to 15 drinks in an evening. And they drink, believe it or not, to blackout. And this is a phenomenon now. Nora was talking about social media. We don't know exactly what's driving it, but we know that on college campuses now, individuals are reporting that they are aspiring, God forbid, to drink to blackout. Now, a blackout is where you don't remember what transpired while you were drinking, okay? It's not a permanent memory deficit. It's not passing out. It's simply a gap in the tape. But you can imagine how that can be very serious. And here's some of the statistics on it, but 17% of males and 22% of females from 18 to 20 years old are showing blackout on college campuses. And, binge drinking among college students is very prevalent, in the 30%, almost 40% range, and blackouts are very common. With estimates of 32% experience a blackout each year. So this is a serious issue. And, it brings us to trying to understand, in a sense, the basic research basis for what happens when a young person between the ages of 12 and 21 actually is ingesting this kind of alcohol. So I just want to show you 2 pieces of data from the NCANDA study. This was the National Consortium on Alcohol and Neurodevelopment in Adolescents. It's a cross-sectional longitudinal design. So individuals are taken from 12 to 13 years old all the way up to 20 to 21 at different increments of age. And we recruited 700 approximately individuals that were imaged. And there are a couple of things that are actually coming out from this data. It's been ongoing now for several years, and it, in a sense, you could think of it as the precursor, as Nora pointed out, to the ABCD study. And it's been invaluable for laying down some of the foundations of some of the things we are doing in the ABCD study, but we're also getting data. And one of the pieces of data that's really kind of interesting is on this slide, is that these individuals, both initially and at the 1-year follow-up, are showing a kind of a biomarker of excessive alcohol use, which is that they stay up later at night and they sleep later in the morning. And this is called eveningness. And you can see that the high drinkers, even in these cross-sectional design, it was about, in total there, probably about 100 subjects out of the 700, have a higher at-risk alcohol use. They're more likely to binge alcohol use and higher marijuana use as well. So I think you're going to see from the ABCD study, it'd be nice if some of these kind of early results are confirmed, but you're going to see information that we never knew was out there that may lead us to a whole lot of better ways of diagnosing, but also intervening in substance use disorders. And here's another finding that, of course, is very dear to my heart, because they found a weaker functional amygdala precuneus, that's cortical connectivity, in the youth who had exceeded the NCANDA study entry criteria. So when they screened the original 700, 800, almost 900 individuals, actually, there were some who exceeded this criterion they set, which was a sliding criteria depending on age, for being included in the NCANDA study. But they had all the other data and they had their brains. And in the 117 individuals who exceeded already the criterion that they would be accepted into the study, they have a lower connectivity between the cortex and the amygdala. And of course, the amygdala drives a lot of stress-related activity and can lead also to impulsivity. I'm just learning about, some of you know about this, negative urgence. Some more sobering information, and that is that there's been a steady increase in drinking in females in the United States over the last 10 years, and that's illustrated in this slide. It's actually been a slight decrease in males, but so you can see there's a narrowing of the difference. At one time, it was a large difference between males and females. It's now narrowing. Again, probably because of multiple reasons, many of which could be social. But it raises the issue that we should be studying the effects of alcohol in females and what is unique about it. We know that in females, there's a telescoping of the pathology associated with alcohol. In other words, there's a faster onset of liver disease, a faster onset of other pathologies that are associated with excessive alcohol use in females, and we need to get to the biological basis for that. For you old farts in the audience, we're drinking more too, and you can see this on this slide, and again, you can see somewhat of a narrowing between the sexes in this domain, and this is an area that NIAAA is going to start putting some energy. And then to the point about the opioid epidemic, there is a pretty good contribution of alcohol to the problems associated with alcohol overdose. So I'm going to just show you very quickly 3 slides in a row that were worked up by Aaron White. Actually, it was in a discussion with Nora that led us to draft up these slides. But you can see here that alcohol is involved in about 15% of cases of the increase in emergency department visits over the last 10 years. Alcohol is involved in about 20% of the increase in hospitalizations, and again, the same slopes to these curves. And alcohol contributes to about 15% of the deaths associated with opioids. And I would be willing to guess that this is a gross underestimation, all right? Because alcohol is not often reported in some of these forms. But it's a warning sign to you that you know from your basic pharmacology, 2 + 2 = 5. So if you drink alcohol with any sedative hypnotic or opioid, you are increasing the likelihood of respiratory depression, you're increasing the likelihood of acute overdose and death. So what can we do about some of these things? Well, one of the things in our strategic plan that we plan on working on is and it's been part of our program, is advancing behavioral treatments for alcohol use disorder. We want to promote research to enhance the effectiveness of current behavioral therapies for a wider range of patients across a wider range of settings. I've already spoken to 2 of those groups, females and the older population. We want to examine the effectiveness of novel behavioral interventions. We want to characterize changes in neural circuits that accompany responses to behavioral treatments for alcohol use disorders and determine which therapies work best for which patient. And to be honest with you, I consider this preclinical research, Leonard. And we want to investigate the use of non-invasive devices capable of altering brain activity and alcohol use disorder treatments or adjuncts to treatment. And we're engaged already in using electronic health technology to improve the effectiveness, accessibility, and use of interventions. We do also have a modest medications development program. We, as with NIDA, and at the instigation of NIDA, have modified our STTR program to facilitate the translation from basic research to clinical research by facilitating the development of INDs. This is one of the valleys of death in drug development. We have established human laboratory studies, and we're standardizing those for measures of craving and desire of alcohol, and we hope to use this as an initial screen in clinical work before we do major clinical trials. And we also have a small clinical investigations group that generally runs about 1 clinical trial a year. And so this is the model that we've adopted. It's very similar at NIDA. But, to push basic research in the alcohol field, and many of these targets extend to addiction in general, we have a vast number of targets. But what we don't know is to what patients they will apply, what components of the addiction cycle, what individual differences are going to be important in determining whether some of these targets will be good targets for medications development. And we really need to move some of these from the basic research preclinical to the clinical. So, I totally agree that the preclinical field should not be neglected. It should be enhanced. We need a lot more work in understanding some of these targets and what they mean and how we can translate them to the clinical setting in a very effective way without wasting a great deal of money. And just to give you one example, the vasopressin 1B antagonist was actually a study I did in my laboratory at the Scripps Research Institute. It came out positive in a excessive drinking model where the rats are made dependent on alcohol. We moved it to a clinical trial, multi-center clinical trial, and this drug was actually effective in increasing the percentage of days abstinent. Mary Jean Creek has worked on this same target for opiate addiction. And, we can't get anybody in the pharmaceutical industry to really get interested in carrying this forward. So, there's that frustration as well. We want to promote recovery research. This is a big area that I'm quite taken with. We have really no clue. If you go to a treatment facility, and I've done this in my life, and spent time at treatment facilities in the San Diego area, they call the patients up maybe every 6 months, see how they're doing. But we have no idea in these treatment facilities what really worked. Was it the naltrexone they received? Was it the acamprosate they received? Was it the cognitive behavioral therapy? Was it going to Alcoholics Anonymous? Or was it the yoga class? We just don't know. And so we want to operationally define recovery and develop measures that reflect it. We want to identify factors that facilitate or prevent relapse and promote resilience. I mean, you try to get a group of people together and talk about resilience, and you can spend the whole day and come out of it at the end with no definition. But we're going to have to bite the bullet and start honing in on some concrete operational definitions for some of these terms. We want to identify novel biomarkers of relapse risk. We want to evaluate the effectiveness of mutual help groups and recovery systems of care. And we want to explore the optimal timing and dose of alcohol use interventions needed to maximize recovery. And I think it goes without saying that many of the things we learn we do in collaboration with NIDA, and many of the things NIDA learn, they do in collaboration with us. These are certain areas where there's significant overlap in our concerted efforts under the Collaborations and Research on Addictions at NIH. I hope you're impressed that I know that acronym. One of the things I've been working on that I've been taking with, because we get a lot of inquiries from colleagues, but even other IC directors on, I have a nephew in Atlanta and they just had a stomach bleed due to excessive alcohol use, and where do I take them? And so we're developing what we call the treatment navigator, and we hope to, in this navigator, it should be out in the next month or two, we hope to outline the features of evidence-based alcohol use disorder treatment, describe the various routes to recovery in the American medical system, and provide tools for locating the most qualified treatment specialists. And this is going to be a web-based program. It's well underway, nearly complete, and we're going to launch it, and we'll see how it's received. But we've already screened it through a whole bunch of different populations. This is also in collaboration with ASAM and a number of other organizations that have curated lists of treatment providers. But the point of this is that it's very, very difficult. Most Americans think there are two treatments for alcohol use disorder. You go into 30-day detox, or you go to Alcoholics Anonymous. They have no idea that there are clinical psychologists, that there are certified counselors, that there are outpatient facilities where you can go in the evenings. None of these things are really established in the public's general knowledge about treatment. And then this is something we are working on with NIDA in an intimate way, but we are very interested in integrating addiction medicine into medical education, and particularly, of course, information about alcohol use disorders and the biology of addiction into medical training. And so we've had a grant to SUNY Buffalo to translate addiction into clinical practice, and in collaboration with the American Board of Addiction Medicine. This paved the way for integrating addiction medicine into postgraduate medical education at 37 academic centers. It provided a model for residency training in addiction medicine, and it laid the groundwork for recognizing addiction medicine as a subspecialty by the American Board of Medical Specialties. And NIDA has been very, very active in this domain as well. And so NIAAA and other federal agencies have been engaged with the White House and the previous administration on a national effort to grow the addiction medicine workforce. And the next steps will be to identify medical school curriculum needs and enhance addiction medicine questions on medical board exams. I mean, this is not an easy task. Nora and I have worked a lot on this, and some of our staff. It gets to a catch-22. There are no questions on the board. So there's no curriculum. And so if you go to the curriculum, they say, well, there's no questions on the board. You go to the board, they say, well, there's no curriculum. And so you know the story. And then a couple of things that are very parochial to the alcohol field before I end. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. We have a big program in this. I don't talk about it a lot because I'm waiting for some really key seminal papers on epidemiology to come out. But later this year, we'll probably have a big push on explaining some of the results that we found. But we've made some really significant advances. So we're charged with characterizing the biological mechanisms underlying fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and biological and environmental factors contributing to it. We're identifying biomarkers of prenatal alcohol exposure. We're trying to improve fetal alcohol spectrum disorder diagnosis. We've advanced a 3D facial imaging technology that detects fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in a broader range of people and settings, and even in infants. And we can distinguish now individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders from those with other neurodevelopmental conditions. We've done this not only with imaging, but also now with an algorithm of neuropsychological tests. And so we're hoping that the data on more precise fetal alcohol spectrum disorder prevalence estimates will be out, like I said, later this year. That they're being analyzed now. And that was started by Ken Warren. Many of you know Ken before I arrived at NIAAA, but I'm eagerly awaiting to see what the results are going to be. But we want to develop interventions to prevent and reduce alcohol misuse during pregnancy. I think that should be obvious. And then, I know you guys don't care about the liver, but you should. You at least should care about your own liver. And we have been making some significant advances in the basic research associated with alcoholic liver disease. We have an alcoholic hepatitis consortium. There are 4 sites. We're trying to develop standardized definitions and common data elements and measures for the clinical trials in these sites without reading that. But we also have other advances. We know that there's activation of the inflammasome, and interleukin-1 plays a critical role in the development of alcohol-induced liver inflammation. And we also know that your gut, your microbiome, human intestinal fungi are linked to alcohol liver disease and increased risk of death from alcoholic liver disease. And preclinical studies are showing that antifungals may be protective. So hard to believe, but your inflammatory system, and that may extend to neural inflammation as a result of the liver being inflammation system being activated, but also even your microbiome may be contributing significantly to liver disease. So that's pretty much it. These are our publications. You can find everything. I'll tell you one that's quite valuable, and even occasionally an IC director will ask me about, and I use it for every interaction I have with the press, and that's rethinking drinking. If you go to this website, you can find your favorite drink on there, whether it's a margarita or some kind of cocktail. You can calculate how much alcohol is in that drink, and you can move on and figure out what the dose effect curve looks like. You can look at how much alcohol it takes to get at a certain point in a BAL. There's lots of other links on this, but it's a very popular website. So thank you very much.